If you are 58 years old with $400,000 in your super account, watching a 25-year-old talk about a 30-year wealth explosion feels less like advice and more like a joke at your expense. That content was never built for you. It assumes 3 decades of compounding ahead. You do not have 3 decades. You have somewhere between 5 and 10 years. And inside that shorter window, the math that matters is not the math that made someone else rich in their 20s. There is a part of this most retirement content skips entirely. Inside those 5 to 10 years sit 3 specific triggers written directly into Australian superannuation and pension law, and hitting them can lift your effective retirement income more than almost anything else you could do with the money you already have. Not by taking more risk, not by picking better shares, by using rules that were, in part, built for people exactly your age. Call it the compressed tipping point. It is the moment where the $32,500 concessional cap and the $300,000 downsizer contribution stop being obscure line items on an ATO page and start acting like a second income stream, one that arrives largely tax-free. Miss these 3 triggers, and you could be leaving up to $160,000 of effectively government-sponsored wealth sitting on the table. Hit them, and the next 10 years look nothing like the last 30. So let's start with the first one. It is not hiding in the share market. It is hiding in your own payslip. If you are over 55 and tired of being told you should have started sooner, stay with this one. This channel is built around retirement math for people who are already close, not people who still have 40 years to figure it out. Start with the number that changes everything. In the 2026 to 2027 financial year, you can put $32,500 into your super before tax, and if your total super balance sits under $500,000, you can also reach back and use any unused cap room from the last 5 years on top of that. Watch what that does to your tax bill. Say you earn $120,000 a year. Salary sacrifice the full $32,500 and your taxable income drops to $87,500. You are still sitting in the same tax bracket you started in, the one that taxes each extra dollar at 30% once you are earning above $45,000. So every dollar you sacrifice would otherwise have been taxed at 30 cents in the dollar. Inside super, that same dollar is taxed at 15 cents. That gap, 15%, is money in your pocket before your investments have done a single thing. But that $32,500 figure hides the detail that actually matters. It is only the current year's cap. The real trigger sits underneath it, in the 5-year carry-forward rule, and it only switches on once your total super balance is under $500,000. Picture someone aged 59 with $450,000 in super and a salary of $110,000. They have $50,000 of unused cap sitting from the last 5 years, on top of this year's $32,500. Put both to work in a single year, $82,500 total, and the tax saved compared to taking that same money as ordinary pay comes to close to $12,375. That is not a return from the market moving in your favor. That is a return from paperwork you were already entitled to and never claimed. Why does the system work this way? Because the concessional tax rate on super exists to reward people for locking money away for retirement instead of spending it now, and the carry-forward rule exists specifically for people who could not max out their cap in their 30s and 40s because a mortgage, kids, or a career gap got in the way first. There is a real cost underneath this, and it is worth naming plainly. Every dollar you push into super through this trigger is a dollar you cannot touch again until you reach your preservation age. If your day-to-day cash flow is already tight, catching up too aggressively can leave you asset rich and cash poor in your late 50s. The trigger works best when you are not relying on that same money to cover next month's bills. I used to think the $500,000 balance limit on carry-forward contributions was just another line the government drew to keep people out. Now I see it differently. For anyone who spent their 30s and 40s raising a family instead of maxing out a retirement account, it works more like a turbo button, a way to compress 20 years of missed contributions into a handful of high-income years right when you can actually afford them. That is the first trigger, and it lives entirely in your paperwork. Ask yourself honestly whether you have ever actually checked how much unused cap room you are sitting on. Most people never have. The second trigger lives in the biggest asset most people over 55 own, and it has nothing to do with the share market at all. Picture a couple in their early 60s. We will call them Gary and Susan. They have $300,000 sitting in super between them and a home in Melbourne, worth $1,500,000. On paper, that home is their biggest asset. In practice, it produces zero income. It just sits there, needing a new roof eventually, and costing more in rates and upkeep every year they stay. This is the second trigger, and it has nothing to do with salary sacrifice. It is the downsizer contribution, and it lets each of them put up to $300,000 from the sale of that home into super. No work test, no upper age limit, as long as they are 55 or older. Between the two of them, that is $600,000 that can move from bricks and mortar into a retirement account almost overnight. Say Gary and Susan sell the Melbourne home and buy something smaller in a regional area for $900,000. Up to $600,000 of the proceeds can go straight into super, on top of whatever they already had in there, right up to the $2,100,000 transfer balance cap that governs how much can sit inside a tax-free pension account. This is the shift that matters. Once that $600,000 is inside super and drawing an income, even a conservative 5% yield turns it into $30,000 a year, arriving with no tax attached. To replace that $30,000 from a wage, once tax and the Medicare levy are stripped out, you would need to be earning somewhere close to $45,000 before tax. Gary and Susan just matched a decent part-time salary without either of them lifting a finger again. Why does this work when salary sacrifice alone often cannot get you there fast enough? Because the downsizer rule sidesteps the usual contribution caps entirely. It does not care about your income, your work status, or how much you have already put into concessional contributions this year. It only cares that you are 55 or older and that the home you are selling has genuinely been your main residence. There is a real trade-off underneath this, and it deserves to be said plainly. Staying in a large, high-maintenance home with a thin super balance is what we might call the fragility path. Every unexpected repair, every rate rise, every special levy comes straight out of a retirement income that was never built to absorb it. Downsizing into something smaller and pushing that equity into super is the resilience path instead. It is not about giving up a home you love. It is about deciding whether that equity keeps sitting still or starts working for you the way the rest of your super already does. So ask yourself honestly, is the home working for you at this point, or are you working to keep the home? That covers the first two triggers, the one hiding in your payslip and the one hiding in your house. The third one is different again, and it is the one most retirement content avoids talking about entirely because it involves a government payment people are often too proud to plan around. Here is a number that surprises almost everyone I talk to about this. As a couple who own your home, you can hold up to $499,000 in assessable assets on top of the home itself and still receive the full age pension. That is $905.20 each per fortnight, close to $47,070 a year between you before you have touched a single dollar of your own super. Most people assume that building up super is a straight trade against the pension, that every extra dollar saved is a dollar of government payment lost. That is only half true. And the half that is missing happens to be the half that matters most for someone in your position. Above that $499,000 threshold, the taper rate kicks in. For every $1,000 of assets over the line, you lose $3 a fortnight, around $78 a year. It sounds small until you stack it up over a large balance. But here is the part worth sitting with. To fully replace the pension using your own money instead, you would need a genuinely large capital base doing the work on its own. Most people in your position do not need to replace it entirely. They need to work with it. That is the real tipping point here, not more money for its own sake, but the specific point where your own super income and a part-age pension together land you on what ASFA calls a comfortable lifestyle, currently around $77,375 a year for a couple. Some households get there mostly through super. Others get there through a smaller super balance and a bigger slice of pension. Both are valid paths to the same number, and neither one is the wrong answer. The pension is not a fallback for people who saved too little. For most people your age, it is simply built into the plan from day one. I don't know your exact spending habits, and no generic calculator does either. But I do know that the peace of mind that comes from a guaranteed government floor sitting under your income is something no spreadsheet can fully capture. It is the difference between watching the market through a bad week and barely noticing it happened. So before you assume a bigger super balance is automatically the win, run the numbers both ways. Sometimes the version of you with a slightly smaller balance and a part pension underneath it sleeps a lot better than the version chasing the biggest possible number. Hit these three triggers: the catch-up crossover, the downsizer match, and the pension sweet spot, and your retirement income looks completely different to where it started. But there is one more question sitting underneath all of this. What happens if the market drops the same year you finally retire? Let's stress test all of this against the one risk that can undo even a well-built plan. Say the market drops 15% in your first year of retirement, right after you have stopped drawing a wage and started drawing down your own balance instead. Someone following the standard advice, pulling a flat 4% out of their balance every year, regardless of what the market is doing, locks in that loss the moment they sell shares to fund their pension. They are selling low permanently, and the balance never fully recovers the way it would have if they had simply waited it out. Someone using the triggers we have just walked through handles that same year very differently. They already hold 2 to 3 years of living expenses in cash, sitting outside the share portfolio, built up specifically for a year like this one. When the market drops, they draw from that cash buffer instead of selling shares at the bottom. That is where the third piece comes in. If you are still working part-time or picking up the occasional shift, the work bonus lets you earn up to $300 a fortnight, with unused amounts banking up to $11,800 a year without touching your age pension at all. That extra income can top up the cash buffer or simply reduce how much you need to draw from investments while prices are down. None of this stops a market drop from happening. It just changes who is forced to sell at the worst possible moment and who is not. The people who built the buffer before they needed it are the ones who get to wait the downturn out, calmly, while everyone else watches their balance in a panic. That calm is not luck. It comes from building the buffer months before the downturn, not scrambling to find one after prices have already fallen. We have covered the three triggers and the buffer that protects them. Now the real question is how you actually put this into motion over the next couple of years, not just understand it in theory. If any of this feels like a lot to hold in your head at once, here are the three places to start, roughly in order. First, find out how much unused concessional cap you are sitting on from the last 5 years. Your total super balance needs to be under $500,000 for this to apply, and the number is already sitting in your ATO records. Most people have simply never gone looking for it. Second, work out your gap to comfortable. ASFA puts the lump sum a couple needs at 67 for a comfortable retirement, assuming a part age pension sits alongside it, at around $690,000. Compare that figure to where your super sits today. The gap is not a verdict on your past decisions. It is just a number that tells you how hard each of the three triggers needs to work for you. Third, if you are 55 or older and thinking about downsizing at some point anyway, check your eligibility for the downsizer contribution before you list the property, not after. The timing of that contribution matters more than most people expect. Now, the part that has nothing to do with numbers. If you are only getting serious about this in your 50s, your brain is very good at telling you that you have already lost, that the years you didn't contribute are gone and cannot be recovered. That feeling is normal. It is also not the full picture. The Australian retirement system was not built only for people who started at 22. The carry-forward rule, the downsizer contribution, and the seniors tax offset we are about to cover are all structurally weighted toward people in their peak earning years, which for most Australians is their 50s. A 25-year-old cannot use any of these three triggers. You can right now, in the years you actually have left before retirement. There is one more thing worth clearing up before we finish, because it changes how much you actually need to hit any of these targets in the first place. So let's bring it together. The first trigger lives in your payslip, the concessional cap, and the 5-year carry-forward rule sitting behind it. The second lives in your house, the downsizer contribution, moving equity into a tax-free income stream. The third lives in the relationship between your super and your age pension, the point where the two together get you to a comfortable lifestyle without needing to replace every dollar yourself. Now for the correction most people never hear. Because of the seniors and pensioners tax offset, worth up to $2,230 for a single person, the income you actually need in retirement to match your old take-home pay is lower than most people assume. You keep more of what you make once you stop working, so the number you are chasing is smaller than it looks from the outside. Retirement in your 50s and 60s is not a race you have already lost. It is a set of rules, mostly written for people exactly your age, that you are only now learning to play by. If you want the full breakdown of how that offset actually works, stay subscribed for the next video where we will walk through the exact math.